There's no better way to get to know a band's signature style than by transcribing a bunch of their records. With time, effort, and close study, you can really start to see the ingredients responsible for a band's sound. Why the Charlie Johnson Band sounds different from Fletcher Henderson, or why Duke Ellington in 1928 sounds different to Duke Ellington in 1933. In this episode, I'd like to discuss some of the characteristics of one of my favourite big bands, the Louis Russell Orchestra of 1929 and 1930. What makes it sound so vibrant and unique, aside from the brilliance of its key soloists? Let's take a step back though. Most concerted passages, where all 6 horns are playing together in 1920s and 30s charts, were harmonised like this example from the Baltimore. The first trumpet plays the melody, with the second trumpet playing a harmony part. The first alto then doubles the second trumpet, rather than playing the melody along with the first trumpet. It might seem simpler to have both first trumpet and first alto playing the melody together, mightn't it? Simpler maybe, but not usually the case. Published stock charts were written to be playable by small combinations, so it does make sense to ensure the harmony parts get covered. You don't want doubling up on the melody if you've only got one sax and one trumpet. In addition, having both section leaders play the melody can result in a very strident sound, so it became a convention to have the first alto playing harmony in these concerted passages, not the melody. But what if you want a strident sound? One of the characteristics of the Louis Russell Orchestra is their shouting, full-throated sound, and this is sometimes achieved through the use of what I call shout voicing. That is, the first alto plays the melody in unison with the first trumpet, while second and third members of each section play with each other respectively. Now and then they break from this to add a fourth line or a counter melody. Have a listen to this example from Saratoga Drag. This is definitely a strident sound, but far from being a failure to voice successfully, this is exactly what is required to complement the punchy rhythms of the Louis Russell Orchestra. Much has been made of the fact that many key members of the Russell Band were from New Orleans: Red Allen, Albert Nicholas, Pops Foster, Paul Barbarin. But it's not actually common for them to play a collective ad-lib ensemble chorus, so-called New Orleans style. The horns are much more likely to play one harmonised but rhythmic line, like the ones we've already discussed. When they do ad-lib on ensembles, it's usually 1 or 2 horns freely improvising, while others are playing a riff or concerted melody phrase. Have a listen to the end of Panama. One harmonic habit typical of the band, especially in introductions, interludes, and codas, is their use of dominant ninth chords. This isn't that unusual for the era, but it happens very often in the Louis Russell Band. Have a listen to the introduction to Saratoga Shout. It's built on ninth chords. Sixes are used in the same way, but this is far more representative of the era. The Russell Band makes excellent use of long notes, not just as harmonic padding. Their use of whole and half notes is often far more effective than you might expect. Have a listen to these 2 examples. In this example, from You Might Get Better, But You'll Never Get Well, the chord blankets are actually the main melody, sounding poignant in contrast to the growly trombone responses. In Feeling Drowsy, the saxophone chord blankets create a sense of majesty. There's movement, but it feels inevitable and comforting, acting as an ideal support for Red Allen's trumpet solo. Often trombone parts in 1920 stock charts give trombonists their own line, playing a counter melody, for instance, rather than playing in strict three-part harmony with the two trumpets. This is practical, as trombonists don't always have the strong high register required for that lockstep brass section approach. In the Louis Russell Band, however, they had J.C. Higginbotham, one of the strongest trombonists of his era, and he was perfectly able to act as a third trumpet, as in this example from Jersey Lightning. This effect further strengthens the shouting cry of the band's ensembles. When the brass are playing in concert like this, sometimes the saxes are playing a backing riff, almost like they're supporting a soloist. Listen again to that same section from Jersey Lightning. And here's another example of a classic Russell Band sax riff under Higginbotham's trombone solo on Panama, rhythmic, but still perfectly in the background. The Russell sax section gets plenty of the spotlight though, through the frequent use of saxophone solis. They are close-voiced, often employ the lower register, and are rhythmically and technically tricky. Here's an example from Saratoga Drag. The sax section occasionally switches to clarinets, although less often than in other bands of the era, such as Henderson's. Here's an example from Feeling Drowsy. What about the rhythm section? The Russell rhythm section is much underrated in my opinion. Potts Foster rightly gets a lot of attention, but the others all contribute to its glorious overall sound. I find them particularly effective on medium-fast tunes, where they get a very infectious jogging sound. I think it comes from everyone's willingness to play steady 4/4 time, as well as Barbarin's rhythmic press rolls, which combine beautifully with Foster's busy bass lines. Russell himself doesn't do a lot, but that's sometimes the best choice. Just listen to them at the beginning of Saratoga Drag. This jogging sound might get a bit tiresome if it were not appropriately varied. Luckily, both Barbarin and Foster are experts at changing gears. Foster often does this by switching between 2 beats and 4 beats per bar, or by switching between bowed bass and slapped bass. See how he takes things down a gear for the vocal in You Might Get Better, But You'll Never Get Well.
Get better, but you'll never get well. Don't try to fool me, babe, 'cause I can tell.
And he creates a similar change for the trumpet solo in Panama. Now listen to him send things into overdrive at the end of that solo, putting down his bow and switching to 4. So, that's some of what I've learned from transcribing the Louis Russell Orchestra's records. My transcriptions may not always be 100% accurate, and when I play them with a live band, will never reach the Louis Russell standard. But through this sort of study, one gains a greater repertoire of sounds to draw on for one's own writing. That's got to be a good thing. And when I put on a Louis Russell record, I don't just love it, I understand why I love it too.